Household debt is defined as the amount of money that all adults in the household owe financial institutions. It includes consumer debt and mortgage loans. A significant rise in the level of this debt coincides historically with many severe economic crises and was a cause of the U.S. and subsequent European economic crises of 2007 to 2012. Several economists have argued that lowering this debt is essential to economic recovery in the U.S. and selected Eurozone countries. Household debt can be defined in several ways, based on what types of debt are included. Common debt types include home mortgages, home equity loans, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. Household debt can also be measured across an economy, to measure how indebted households are relative to various measures of income, for example, pre-tax and disposable income, or relative to the size of the economy, GDP. The burden of debt can also be measured in terms of the amount of interest it generates relative to the income of the borrower. For example, the U.S. Federal Reserve measures the Household Debt Service Ratio, DSR, an estimate of the ratio of debt payments to disposable personal income. Debt payments consist of the estimated required payments on outstanding mortgage and consumer debt. The Fed also measures the Financial Obligations Ratio, FOR, which adds automobile lease payments, rental payments on tenant-occupied property, homeowners insurance, and property tax payments to the debt service ratio. Homeowner and renter FORs are calculated by applying homeowner and renter shares of payments and income derived from the Survey of Consumer Finances and Current Population Survey to the numerator and denominator of the FOR. The homeowner mortgage FOR includes payments on mortgage debt, homeowners insurance, and property taxes, while the homeowner consumer FOR includes payments on consumer debt and automobile leases. In the 20th century, spending on consumer durables rose significantly. Household debt rose as living standards rose, and consumers demanded an array of durable goods. These included major durables like high-end electronics, vehicles, and appliances that were purchased with credit. Easy credit encouraged a shift from saving to spending. Households in developed countries significantly increased their household debt relative to their disposable income and GDP from 1980 to 2007, one of the many factors behind the US and European crises of 2007 to 2012. Research indicates that U.S. household debt increased from 43% to 62% of GDP from 1982 to 2000. U.S. households made significant progress in deleveraging, reducing debt, post-crisis, much of it due to foreclosures and financial institution debt write-downs. By some measures, consumers began to add certain types of debt again in 2012, a sign that the economy may be improving as this borrowing supports consumption. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) reported in April 2012. Household debt soared in the years leading up to the Great Recession. In advanced economies, during the 5 years preceding 2007, the ratio of household debt to income rose by an average of 39 percentage points, to 138%. In Denmark, Iceland, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Norway, debt peaked at more than 200% of household income. A surge in household debt to historic highs also occurred in emerging economies such as Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, and Lithuania. This occurred largely because the central banks implemented a prolonged period of artificially low policy interest rates, temporarily increasing the amount of debt that could be serviced with a given income. The leveraging up fueled a consumption boom that, ironically, boosted GDP in the countries in question, but represented not a sustainable boost to aggregate demand, but instead a mere pulling forward of consumption, as people took on new 30-40-year debt to pay for current year expenditures. The predictable fallout of this policy is the slow growth that these countries are experiencing today. At the time, the concurrent boom in both house prices and the stock market, as the prices of financed and financial assets were bid up by virtue of the same low rates, meant that household debt relative to assets held broadly stable, which masked households' growing exposure to the eventual sharp fall in asset prices. House prices in particular were vulnerable to sharp movements in policy rates in countries in which most mortgages are adjustable rate, as 30-40-year loans are highly rate sensitive. House purchases are financed at 80-95% of the price, and only 4-5% of homes change owners in a year. Despite this low volume, the appraisal rules in most countries limit the number of times that a sale can serve as a comp only in terms of time, 12 months, not the number of times that a given sale can be used as a comp. Because of this, a cash-out refi boom followed the low-rate-driven price increase. This was the primary vehicle through which developed countries' households leveraged up. On the supply side, homebuilders are also financed at short rates. In the U.S., prime. Their cost of capital was effectively cut in half by virtue of the central bank rate cuts, enabling them to overbuild in response to the rise in prices, with all the new supply making the eventual price collapse worse than it would otherwise have been. In short, the entire episode was straight out of Ludwig von Mises' Human Action, Chapter 20, with the new twist that most of the debt was incurred on the consumer side. When rising consumer prices forced the central banks to allow policy rates to rise back up toward market rates, the wind propping up house prices was taken away. House prices immediately declined, ushering in the global financial crisis. Many households, who had reduced their savings out of a belief in the wealth effect, saw their wealth shrink relative to their debt, and, with less income and more unemployment, especially in the previously booming real estate sector, found it harder to meet mortgage payments. Strategic defaults became common, as homeowners with significant negative equity simply abandoned the home and the debt. By the end of 2011, real house prices had fallen from their peak by about 41% in Ireland, 29% in Iceland, 23% in Spain and the United States, and 21% in Denmark. Household defaults, underwater mortgages where the loan balance exceeds the house value, foreclosures, and fire sales became endemic to a number of economies. Household deleveraging by paying off debts or defaulting on them has begun in some countries. It has been most pronounced in the United States, where about 2/3 of the debt reduction reflects defaults. Of note, Germany, in which almost all mortgages carry 10-year pricing, and in which the 10-year interest rate did not decline during the 2000s, no housing bubble occurred at all. Also, in Canada, in which most mortgages are ARMs but 3-5-year, and which experienced a muted drop in intermediate term rates, the housing bubble was more muted than in neighboring U.S.